I don't want the prize end of the game that I'm currently playing. So by definition, I have to change games.
What were some of the pivotal decisions that helped shape your path?
I showed up at Brev on day one. There was a $300-something thousand unpaid AWS bill. And they said, we're not collecting revenue, go fix it.
How are you setting yourself apart from like 1,000 different people?
Personal branding is great, but don't be doing it just because you want money, fame, your career growth. That's not the reason to do it.
Hi everyone and welcome to 0 to 1. Our guest today is Carter Abdallah, a dev tech engineer at NVIDIA, former founding engineer at Brev, which was recently acquired by NVIDIA, and a content creator with over 1 million followers across social media. From leading engineering teams at a fast-paced startup to now shaping cutting-edge AI and cloud tools at one of the world's top tech companies, he brings a rare perspective that bridges both skill and scrappiness. Carter is now the perfect voice to explore how tech is evolving and what it means for the next generation of builders. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, Carter.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Let's start at the beginning. So what initially drew you to Georgia Tech, and what were you hoping to do with your CS degree or computer engineering degree at that time?
For me, I didn't realize how non-unique of a story this was, but I played a lot of video games growing up, and one of my favorite games was Minecraft. And I actually was really interested in the redstone component, and I ended up learning very basic things about like logic gates and stuff to build certain redstone contraptions. This is when I'm like 11, 12 years old. And pretty much from 6th grade on, I ended up building my own PC for gaming, and I knew that I wanted to be a computer engineer. Actually, like in 6th grade, we did this thing called a time capsule. 3 things about the future. And one of the things I wrote was I want to study computer engineering. I wanted to go to MIT, and I have a crush on some girl, whatever it was. Didn't end up going to MIT. I want to go to Georgia Tech, and ended up studying computer engineering. At the time, I thought I wanted to study chip design. I realized pretty quickly after having 1 or 2 classes where I'm actually putting wires over little circuit boards and it not working and trying to debug an actual, basically, logic and or hardware bug was very frustrating to me. But then I took computer science classes and I found that a lot more enjoyable. So I just leaned pretty heavily into the CS side of my degree. I actually picked up a minor in intelligence, started interning as a software engineer my sophomore summer, did that through and after senior year actually, and went straight into industry, converted the internship after senior year full-time, then moved out to San Francisco in January of 2023.
Very cool. So the 3 of us all went to Georgia Tech. So I'm curious to know, like, what was your experience at Georgia Tech like? And a question that we get very often is, how do you balance work, gym, personal projects, all that kind of stuff, being a student?
So my experience at Georgia Tech was phenomenal. It really made me think that Georgia Tech is one of the perfect mixes of what I would say is like a traditional college experience while also getting a phenomenal education. It is about what you put in. I hate the argument that people are like, college is such a scam because you have to learn everything on your own anyways. They don't teach you anything. And I'm sitting there thinking like, no, I could not be where I am without my education from Georgia Tech. But also, I actually didn't do a whole lot outside of the classroom, apart from maybe practicing LeetCode, code, but I just leaned really heavily into the projects, homework, etc. And then I was qualified enough to land jobs that paid a lot of money. And there were people who graduated alongside me and alongside you who probably didn't have those opportunities because they just didn't put in the effort. So if 2 people can graduate and one person ends up at Amazon and Google and the other person graduates without a job, but you guys had the same degree at the same school, then clearly there's a difference there in sort of the personal journey that you took. As far as balancing it though, I mentioned earlier, I was in a fraternity. That was like really formative for me. The social life there and Greek life at Georgia Tech was a lot of fun. I actually became president of my fraternity while I was there, while still maintaining basically a 4.0 GPA and working out and doing all of that stuff. And I don't have more time than other people have in the day, right? I will say that one thing is like I didn't have to work while I was doing school. I did intern over the summer, but I know that certain people have to work part-time to support themselves. I'm very blessed that I didn't have to do that. Let's say that that's not the case here. I think that so many people are just not honest, or they don't even know. It's not about not being honest with yourself, how and why you're spending your time certain ways. I oftentimes would have a little too many responsibilities, and that's when some of them would start to suffer. And that's when I would decide, okay, it's time to pare down the list of stuff I'm doing. People ask me, how many hours did you study a day? I have no idea. What was the best way to study for exams? Well, it depends on the class, right? And so I can't give you the blueprint. But what I think is the sort of high level meta thing that you need to focus on is, what is your current schedule? Is it working? That actually alone is something that a lot of people don't know, is what are the metrics for you to decide whether what you're currently doing is working or not? If it's not, how do you update that? How do you remeasure? And then you just go like that. Work towards being able to tell when something is or isn't working and how to change it quickly when it isn't.
I couldn't agree more, honestly. I feel like we had very similar, a very active life, both of us, at Georgia Tech, and I'm sure Ashna as well. So I guess moving on, you started at Georgia Tech, right? Then you became a founding engineer at Brev.dev, which is a Silicon Valley startup, and now you work for NVIDIA. So looking back, what were some of the pivotal decisions that helped shape your path?
One of the most important, I think, is, when I decided to leave big tech and move into the startup space, that's a non-trivial decision that many people don't make. There'll be terms, everything from, like golden handcuffs, referring to the amount of money that you make at something like a big tech job. And walking away from that, I took basically like a 50% pay cut to go towards the startup. And I was willing to make that decision because I had just been promoted and got a nice salary bump, and that was great. I wasn't sure whether I wanted the next promotion. Okay, do I want my manager's job? No, not really. Okay, I don't want the prize at the end of the game that I'm currently playing. So by definition, I have to change games. I'm playing the wrong game. And realistically, it wasn't me then going out and hunting for a bunch of startups. I think this was a mindset shift that sort of allowed me to take off what I'll call the proverbial blinders, where all of a sudden opportunities that I wasn't really open to before, I now was like fielding. And I get messages from LinkedIn of startups all the time. However, my childhood Arabic tutor is an amazing man named Nader Khalil. He lives in San Francisco as well. And so he called to say, hey, like happy Thanksgiving. And he had tried to hire me pretty much every year, almost on the year, since before I even graduated. But this time, I was open to listening for the first time, right? He was like, come co-work with us for a week when you get back. I did that and I realized, okay, this is actually the thing that I want to go do. Some important notes on that is like, I live a lot of my life online on social media, and you should see some of the original comments. Oh, it's definitely going to fail. Like, why would you do that? You were making so much money. Like, this is so financially irresponsible at your age if you had just blah, 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 right? And so it's like those, a lot of them will be super critical, but a lot of them are things that, you might have even heard from like friends and family, or the internal dialogue when you're making a risky decision like that. I had thought that through already ahead of time. I don't want you to just go take massive risks, because that's not what this was. I had actually been very financially responsible to where I had, like many months of runway. Let's say this thing goes belly up tomorrow. I even actually had a good dialogue with the company I was leaving. And there was this kind of assumption like, hey, this is really cool. Take a bet on yourself. But if it doesn't work out, we'll always hire you back. And so I had all of these things laid out to where it might look like a really bad risk, but in reality, if it crashed and burned, I wouldn't be that bad off. And so that's where I was really comfortable making that decision. As far as like a pivotal decision, that's obviously one of them. Once you're in the startup, there's a ton of decisions that actually led my own and my team's and collective decisions that led us to, for example, get acquired by NVIDIA, which truly is life-changing outcome. Just going and working for a startup, many people do that. And getting that startup acquired puts you in a much smaller pool.
You probably answered the few other questions I wanted to ask you as well in this answer. So there's one specific question that we crowdsourced actually. Finding, I guess, like a strong early team can make all the difference, right? So how did you intentionally put yourself out there, to meet the founders of Brev? What role has, networking or community played in opening, those specific opportunities?
A lot of people look at the fact that, the founder was my childhood Arabic tutor again and say, oh my God, you were so lucky, which of course I am. But at the end of the day, I not only kept a connection alive that I had no idea how it was going to pay off, but also I was the person that he would want to work with. You cannot get anywhere on this world alone. The people that you can cultivate a connection with to where you can actually not necessarily leverage it right now, but leverage it in the future are really important. And you should sort of be like collecting people throughout your entire life. Truly what made a difference at the time was I was posting on social media. It's funny that a non-trivial amount of people will be like, I feel like I'm up to date, not on your life, but like on you, because you show up on my screen every day. And it's even if it's like they're not really watching it, think about what that does in terms of like, we hadn't really talked a whole lot in like 15 plus years. And yet he's seeing me every day. So him calling me just feels like a no-brainer. Some people, I think, will be super bullish on like cold outreach, which I think is fine. Like there is nothing actually inherently wrong with it. I just think it is very ineffective. I think that if you can actually just build connections with people and not try and make it transactional, and then those sort of relationships will flourish over time, some of those people are going to do really cool stuff. And don't be the person who, push them into the urinal and then 10 years later is asking for money. Be the person who has always been rooting for them or they're rooting for you. And then when it's time to team up, it's just time to team up. It felt really natural. It was almost like because our skill sets align and let's go do this thing. Ryan, you're also Lebanese, and I think that this is what I would consider to be like a Lebanese superpower is just being super sociable. Charisma is something that, in soft skills in general, are something that should not be ignored, especially when you're talking about something like an early stage startup. At the end of the day, you can say, oh, they're hiring based on pedigree or what company you worked for. And that's like a very crude metric. But at the end of the day, building an early team, and whether that's hiring somebody, in the case of like them hiring me, it's based on vibes. And you have to give off good vibes. There's a de-risking nature that you have to do. And you can de-risk yourself, sure, by going to Stanford. But there's a lot of Stanford grads who are not actually hard workers, right? And for a number of different reasons. But I basically showed, and because he knew me and he knew that he liked me, that's a lot easier to then work with somebody. You can't just go out and, again, cold DM all of these startups and expect to join a team as the first employee. The first employee is always going to be somebody from within their network. Like, that's just a fact. So join the network.
I think that's a very good point. I feel like a lot of the messages I get on LinkedIn from like students, oh, I've messaged 300 people on email, like LinkedIn. No one's replying. I don't understand. Do you know them? Do they know you? Have you like formed a genuine connection? And they're like, no, but I message them like every day. And I think that's the gap that a lot of people don't realize. It's not about networking with 10 people. It's about the genuine connections you make. Also, I think another thing you mentioned was putting yourself out there on social media, which isn't easy because everyone on the internet has an opinion. But B, on the benefits, I think personal branding is a topic that comes up a lot now. How are you setting yourself apart from like 1,000 different people? And personal branding plays an important role in that. So what are your thoughts on people who are starting out, not sure if they want to be content creators? What is your advice for them?
A lot of people ask me for advice on doing social media or something to that effect. And I'm somebody who is now very comfortable with all of that, whether that's the hate or doing it every day, the consistency, the difficulty of like trying to come up with new stuff to talk about every day. To me, that's like my passion, if you want to use that term, which I'm not a big fan of that term, but I think that it might be suited here. It doesn't feel like work to me. And so many people, when they do it for the wrong reasons. They're the common reasons. Oh, I want to be famous. I want to make money. Wanting it to do it for the personal brand such that it also, helps your career. Like, for example, if somebody was like, oh, I want to join an early stage startup, I guess I have to start posting on TikTok. It's like, no, that's not the message. You need to be able to, if you're going to be doing it for personal branding, which I actually think is beneficial in most cases, you need to be thinking, what value can I uniquely provide to people? And if you deliver on providing that value, then you probably will build some credibility and build an audience. If you do some other things as well, like posting consistently, making sure that your delivery is actually good. But beyond that, like you have to be providing value. That has to be the North Star. Personal branding is great, but don't be doing it just because you want money, fame, your career growth. Like, that's not the reason to do it.
As someone who also started posting on LinkedIn now pretty regularly, I will say it shows in the engagement as well. Like, the work you do that you're like excited about, genuinely care about, tends to do a lot better. That just how the content works. So 100% agree.
So from what I understand, Brev was all about letting developers run AI workloads in seconds without the usual, infra headache. So what do you think really made Brev stand out from the other, dev tools in the same space?
We just had more fun. Like startups don't die for any other reason than when you give up. There were many pivots, most of them before I joined at Brev. What made us special, I think, was honestly, truly our character, our branding, how much we cared. But then additionally, there are technical things. And so that's the woo-woo answer. But I think that it actually bleeds into what I consider to be the actual technical answer. Brev started off as a cloud dev environment tool, just actually CPUs. This is pre-AI. We were cared so much about the developer experience because we were developers. It was a problem that we intimately were facing. And so we were trying to build the best developer experience possible. Your laptop here is pretty good at running an IDE that is doing very kind of CPU type workloads. Well, about 6 months before ChatGPT came out, some AI developers were like, hey, I use you for my CPU development. I would love to use you for my GPU development. That turned out to be a really good idea. We flipped it on and then did a full pivot to GPUs. And what made us different is that because we started with the cloud dev environment, we were so focused on customer experience that the GPU part of it was actually almost an afterthought. It was built, the products, the UX was, in my opinion, first in class for a lot of this stuff. That's really important because when AI became a thing and people started developing and doing these AI workloads, as you were mentioning, all of a sudden your laptop can't run anything. And so now you immediately have to go into the cloud. And so a bunch of developers who have never done anything in the cloud before were forced to do it on day one. That's where the low friction, the ergonomic nature of a dev tool was really important. So yes, there were other people who might like grab GPUs from across the internet and do everything. But if your value proposition was just like, hey, I give you a GPU, but nothing else, then the problem of, hey, I still have to worry about cloud infrastructure now in a way that is unnative to me is still there. And so I think that first touch, really ergonomic feel for developers who could just transition into the cloud onto a GPU, I think that was really the magic that kind of set us apart.
That's so funny because literally a few days ago, we were talking to the VP of engineering at Google. She leads, developer experience, and she literally just said the same thing you said. Like she was really emphasizing on, user experience will be, the make or break, right? That's what's going to make it different from other tools. And the fact that you guys, prioritize this before everything, I think makes so much sense why you guys became successful fast.
She's actually the VP of Developer X, and she was telling us, be a user of what you're building is also such an important part of the process because you're experiencing it firsthand before people can tell you, oh, like this is wrong. You're like, I've already used it. I kind of already know firsthand what is wrong, and that accelerates the process.
100%. That's what honestly transparently frustrates me sometimes about big tech, where people are making decisions and it feels like they don't intimately understand the problem. And so they're making decisions on where things should go or whether this is good or not. And they have no idea what the actual end user wants or needs. And it's like, well, if you are the end user, that makes it pretty abundantly clear, right?
I guess let's continue. We talked about everything from zero, I guess. And like we're walking towards, the one, which is you today. Around July 2024, you guys got acquired by NVIDIA, right? I was wondering if there was a point where you sensed like an acquisition might be on the horizon, and what was going on through your mind, at that time?
There are certain things I can talk about and certain things I can't. But and I can say this: we were not building to get acquired. Sometimes I think that's what people either assume or will even go out with the intention of doing that. That was not our intention. However, when we, transitioned to all of this AI stuff, and as NVIDIA became the market leader, the most popular GPUs, we had AMD chips and we had Intel chips on our platform, and yet nobody really used them. People used NVIDIA chips. And then when we, started building out more features on top of that and doing guides and whatnot, we were using NVIDIA software on NVIDIA hardware. And through networking, as we've talked before, Nader is an amazing, charismatic human being. We developed a commercial partnership with NVIDIA. The software on hardware turned out to be a really, really big value proposition to NVIDIA because we were able to give people almost like a feeling of accelerated computing really easily, because if you think about NVIDIA, what they do is they sell GPUs to whomever, whether that's AWS, GCP, Meta. But if you're an end user and you're like, I want to get onboarded onto the NVIDIA stack, now you have to go figure that out. But if we just smooth that all over, then we get more people into the NVIDIA ecosystem early. So the value proposition made sense. Then as the partnership deepened, there was that thing at the back of my mind, like, I wonder if this is I don't even know if NVIDIA acquires companies. Like, what do they look for? Like, we're really small. Maybe we're too small. And then all of the negotiation and actual stuff like that happened behind closed doors that I was not a part of. And Nader did actually keep it quite a secret, and then brought the team together and said, by the way, guys, we're now getting acquired by NVIDIA. The next 2 weeks, I basically owned a lot of the billing systems of Brev. And so I had to do some essentially, scrounging of data for them. And then we started on July 1st. So of course that we actually knew about it a little bit earlier, but that's when we got acquired.
That's super exciting. Can't even imagine the feelings of like hearing that. And then the aftermath, like, where do we go from now? What do we do,
Yeah, I mean, getting acquired is definitely an interesting experience for a number of different reasons, but it's very jarring. And jarring, I think, has a negative connotation, but I don't necessarily mean it that way. But the pattern interrupt was incredibly aggressive.
We've been talking about a lot of different trends in AI, in the tech world. It is obviously very commonly known. The tech world moves incredibly fast. Every day a new LLM, new type of software, like new app, crazy things are coming out. So I'm curious, what new or emerging trends in AI or software engineering are you personally the most excited about right now?
So one that I think is fun is this concept of like vibe coding. I think that's really popular. And I think a lot of people, again, I've talked about it. I did a section on it at GTC. It's already become somewhat overloaded, but the idea that I am now able to get more out of the code that I want to write without writing as much code is really cool. And so, we actually now have like an enterprise license with Cursor. I use Cursor like at work. I today was building something that probably would have taken me a week. Actually, I know for a fact it would, because I've done it before. I did it while we were, a year ago, before the tools have even gotten this good. And now I did it in a day, and I could not have done that without the tools. I understand why a lot of the young people who are coming into the industry are scared, but I would say that don't be scared of change just because it's change. Software engineering looks unrecognizable from how it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It only makes sense that it'll look unrecognizable 10 years from now. That doesn't mean it's going to be automated away. I think that there's a very long-tailed problem there that does not mean that humans are going to be automated. But what it does mean is that you're going to be able to be way more effective as an engineer, being able to just leverage those tools. That is kind of the trend, right?
I totally agree. Like, I wish I could honestly use Cursor in my day-to-day, But I'm also curious. So you talked a lot about the benefits, obviously, of AI native tools, right? An example you gave is, Cursor, which is an AI native IDE. I also want to look at, the negative side of vibe coding. Inherently, vibe coding abstracts away some stuff, right? So, all the bottom layers are abstracted away from you, so you can just build on top of them. How do you think this negatively affect, non-technical folks who are trying to, build apps from scratch? The fact that they don't know, how the infra was built, or how the bottom layers were built.
Tools can definitely be abused or used incorrectly. And I think that if you truly have no understanding of it, I don't, for example, think that we'll get to a place with I think the no-code tools are really cool. I think that for building an MVP or for children to learn or something like that, I showed that to one of my cousins, and he's 9 and he could build a game. Like, that's amazing. However, the term is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you think after a little bit of competency that you know way more than you actually do. As soon as things start writing out code, you think, well, now I can build anything. There's still a need to understand kind of what you're getting at, which is the fundamentals. And I think that you can actually use these AI tools to learn the fundamentals much, much, much faster than without them. But if you just skip over that entirely, then yes, it'll be like if I give you a calculator that can do really advanced mathematics on it, but you don't know what math you actually need to do with the calculator, then that's not very helpful. There are many people who are already there, but I am not suggesting that, for example, kids stop learning how to code. And code, again, I think is an overloaded term. I think that you probably won't need to know how to build, boilerplate CRUD operations in the future. That might just be a way, the same way that you and I probably haven't touched assembly since maybe one class in college. But we still know the systems and fundamentals and the theory behind it, I think is still incredibly important, which is why I think that a computer science degree is still an incredibly valuable degree.
That's exactly what I was thinking as well. So obviously we went to Georgia Tech together, and at the time I'm not sure if you were interested or even thinking about getting into content creation, right? Sharing your lifestyle content. So what really inspired you to start creating content in the first place? And as your audience has grown, what have you, I guess, learned about making posts or videos? Because you blew up very fast, right? Do you have a secret formula, or is it what's cooking behind the scenes, really?
I mentioned a couple of times that I was in a fraternity in college, and I eventually became president. But when I showed up at 18 years old, I was very lost, kind of. I was a good student. That's what I had going for me. And then I had also been lifting for about 2 years. I think I was passionate about that, but not much else. Through my fraternity, I think that I grew a lot. I became more confident, and then I became what I would consider to be a good leader eventually in the form of president. Many of the younger guys within the fraternity would come to me for advice. They'd come to me for advice on, resume reviews, on talking to girls, on, how to get interviews, or at school even, right? Classes, how to get a position within the fraternity, whatever it was. And that was really, really fulfilling to me. For the first time, I had been in a position where I found what could be referred to as my calling. Then I moved, right? Then I moved to San Francisco, and I started my big tech job as the bottom of the totem pole, and I was learning a lot. There was now this hole that I could physically feel from that being gone from my life. So I was like, well, how can I do this again, right? Maybe I do some kind of, tutoring or whatever, but I didn't really want to look into that. So I was like, what if I just start talking on social media? My first videos are bad, but they're more or less the same format. It's me talking into my camera, just my phone, and talking about the same topics that I do now. I started talking about, how I did well in college, how I balanced everything, some of the stuff we talked about here. I talked about how I got into software engineering, and then I branched out from there relatively quickly. It kind of makes sense that the people who I was trying to target was kind of my younger self. And in my fraternity, there were a ton of my younger selves, because that's just kind of how it works. Every year, there's a new group of freshmen and sophomores, because that market already existed. If you think about it, like in a startup where you have an MVP, you go test it. I already had done that. I did that in my fraternity. And so it's not really surprising to me that actually, 18-year-old men and women tend to be pretty lost and they're looking for some guidance. And something about, it must be my delivery. Maybe I'd honed it in. Of course, like I said, my original videos were not great, but I think they got better over time. I iterated. And then I posted a lot, like 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a day, every day. It's not a slow burn. As you mentioned, Ashna, at the beginning of this, I think that there's an asymmetrical amount of growth from a few videos. You don't know what those are going to be ahead of time. Mr. Beast, I think, uses this analogy where he refers to posting videos as like planting seeds in a garden. And if you plant 3 seeds and you really water them and you take care of them, it's still possible that they could all die. But if you plant 1,000 seeds and you're watering all of them kind of equally, then the odds that you get one that grows really tall is great. And the other thing that's great about that is you had now, obviously, there's the other analogy of like the pottery class where the teacher says, hey, you get graded, half the class gets graded by one pot that they make really well. And then the other half is how many pots that you can make. And the group that does the more pots gets better. And so then they make better pots. And I think that there's an analogy here too on just the posting and posting and posting to sort of put the reps in, to hone that muscle in. And I definitely did that. And with everything that happens success related, there's a level of luck as well. I probably got somewhat lucky, although I will say that I have had other friends who were interested in doing social media, and they were serious about it, and I really and truly committed with them. I gave them advice. I did all that, and then they were able to build successful social medias as well. And so I don't think it truly is like a one-hit wonder.
It is definitely an iterative process. You don't start off perfect. The first video you made is probably like something you cringe at now, like, oh, I could have done that better. But what is important is that you learn through it. I think you become a better speaker, you become a better just curator of information as well, because that's kind of what you're delivering to your audience. So really curious, which platform do you personally find the most rewarding for connecting with your audience?
So my largest audience is on TikTok, and Instagram is number 2. I post the same video to both. I don't really cross-reference them to each other, and they've both kind of grown organically, which is fun. And I actually have noticed that there are some differences between the audiences that I've cultivated on TikTok, which tends to skew a little bit younger, versus Instagram. There's my favorite cohort of audience, which is not all of them, but they tend to engage a lot more, which is actually the parents, predominantly the moms of kids who they think the content would be well suited for. And so then they'll share my videos with their kids, which that's my favorite group of audience that I have. What's nice about short form, at least video, is that all of these platforms, and maybe TikTok was the forcing function, have converged. If you make a 16:9 or a 9:16, I guess, a 9:16 video, then you can post it on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and now LinkedIn and Twitter. And so you make it once, post it everywhere, see what happens. And then, I'm not going to tell you that because TikTok works for me, that TikTok will be your platform, and nor does one platform have to be your platform. I will say that at least TikTok used to pay a lot more, but they don't pay that much anymore. And so I don't really have a favorite platform.
The fact that you can reuse content is very important because content is different everywhere. Sometimes you're like, oh, like it really blew up on Instagram, and they're like, why does the one on TikTok care about this? Part of the process. Also, I think it's really funny, the mom part that you mentioned. I had no idea that was even a target audience.
It wasn't initially, but now I love it.
I'm actually curious. Like, in what context do they show those videos to their, I guess, sons?
Yeah,
or daughters?
I'm like trying to picture a mom like.
So I think the general idea is if I'm giving advice, like, hey, here's how you study, which I don't get explicit with it, but a lot of it is kind of like what I consider to be myself kind of like an old soul. So, I'll talk about like taking care of your health and sleeping well and working hard and being a good person. And oftentimes, particularly young boys are fed, kind of like the get rich quick style stuff around women that I think is terrible advice. But, that is kind of the predominant loud voice right now. And so mom and dad might not be cool to listen to, but I'm closer. I might be like a cool older brother or something to that effect, to where if it's a message that they agree with, that wouldn't be heard or listened to very clearly by their son or daughter, because again, mom and dad aren't cool to listen to, then maybe they'll listen to it if it's from me. So I think that's kind of I'm the covert delivery mechanism for advice that I truly believe is good advice, but also smooths it in a way that they're more likely to listen to it.
Of course, it's amazing how you have completely grown your social media presences across all these different platforms for our audience and aspiring content creators looking to build a following in similar spaces. What piece of advice would you give them?
The two main words would be just start. You're not going to know what your niche is. There are people like, oh, what's my niche going to be? You don't know till you start posting. Don't worry about the fancy camera or the fancy microphone. Don't worry about, whether your hair looks good this day or that day. Purposefully made it incredibly low friction for me. Editing wise, I use CapCut. It's very basic. I don't pay an editor, and all of these things, to where if you're doing content, like you said, that's similar to mine, which is commonly referred to as talking head, meaning, it's just the head talking. It's not well shot or anything like that. The point of the video is the words you're saying. And if the point of the video is the words you're saying, then that's the most important thing. And so as long as you are doing that and getting better at that, then nothing else matters. And so I would say just start posting. If your first 50 videos get 3 views, who cares? Like, continue posting. That's the only advice I can give that gives you a chance at success. If I gave you any other piece of advice and you didn't do that thing, then you would never succeed. So you have to just start.
There's another, question we crowdsourced from our audience as well. How'd you come up with, the ideas you film, right, on a daily basis? Do you have some sort of plan, some sort of, breakdown of topics you want to tackle in a day? Or is it literally, okay, I came up with this, let me talk about it. And whenever I think about something else, I'll just talk about it as well.
When I first started posting, I had a Notion that I set up with like the ideas, then like developed, then like shot and posted, and I would go in and I would look at the analytics and I would add the analytics. I ran out of ideas about 3 to 6 months into posting. We're now deep in year 3, right? And so now it truly is spur of the moment, whether that's, maybe my brain is just so tuned now that like conversations that happen that elucidate something that I'm like, that would be a good video. Or, I did ones when I was in Atlanta last week where I talked about me showing V0, the no code tool to my 9-year-old cousin and how, he was able to do that. And so it's like, I draw an inspiration from my life, from conversations I have, but then additionally, I've got the pillars of stuff that I talk about. And it's non-coincidentally the same pillars that I would talk to the freshmen and sophomores at my fraternity, software engineering, personal finance, building confidence, becoming, fitness, all of those kind of things, the stuff that I have really deep kind of content libraries on now are the things that I personally find to be, super interesting. I think I'm fairly knowledgeable on it. What I kind of do, if you want to have a mental framework, is if I have no ideas, I'll pick one and I'll kind of walk the tree of possibilities of, what I can talk about as far as the video is concerned, down to a leaf where I haven't really covered it yet. Because, I think a lot of people think that running out of ideas, if I was just talking about how to land a software engineering internship, I would have stopped making content a long time ago. But if it's like how to develop a career, well, now that's a lot more broad, and so then if it's not even how to develop a career, if it's like how to find fulfillment, right? And so then I just have opened my aperture of the things that I've allowed myself to talk about so wide that I'll never run out of content.
That's amazing. Thanks, Carter. I guess now we're going to wrap up. So we spoke about Carter, at zero, I guess, kind of, and, we went through his entire life. In short, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned from, 0 to 1?
I think I actually do have an answer, and it's one that's probably relevant to you guys, but also to your audience. And it's one that plagued me. And I think if I were to synthesize a lot of what I've learned, what actually has enabled me to be successful, it's the following. You, in life, need to learn how to measure your success and draw your fulfillment from things that are not immediately sort of synthesizable into words or easy to write down. What does that mean? I, really cared about being a good student. And so I could measure myself against grades. And then it was, okay, well, what college do I get into? And once I got into a college, it's, okay, what grades do I get at college? And what internships do I land? Then it's what companies do I get hired at? It's what's my salary? And you can always, because it's easy to measure yourself against, come up with these metrics. Yes, okay, I am becoming a doctor, so now I should be happy, right? That's what my parents said, and being a doctor means I'm successful. It's an incredibly crude way of defining success to do stuff that can be written down. But because it's the most simple, I think that a lot of people will be drawn to that and never, ever move away. I showed up at Brev on day one, and there was a $300-something thousand unpaid AWS bill. And they said, we're not collecting revenue, go fix it. And I said, well, how do I fix it? And they go, I don't know. That's why you're here. No longer was it, okay, this is exactly the path to do because I'll get a performance review in 6 months that'll tell me I did great work, and then I'll get a pay bump. It was, no, go figure this out. And like, you can bounce ideas off us, but it doesn't matter, whether you did good work is whether you think you did good work, because, the company could go belly up and we're all going down with the ship together, or we're all winning together. Thank God it was the second one. What that meant is I had to decide, okay, what I'm working because, I think this could be successful eventually, but I don't have the clear roadmap to get there. I don't have the metric to point to say, I'm successful because I now work at a no-name company. The takeaway, right, is that it's the more difficult thing to do to figure out, and you can't write it down again. So I can't give you the explicit things, but like, am I on the path I want to be on? What are the things that I can draw on to, for example, build confidence with? Am I doing things that fulfill me? And these are things that are, again, you can't write down on a piece of paper, but are necessary for you to, if you want to use the term like break out of the mold, actually become the name of the podcast is 0 to 1, right? A lot of people can talk about 0. You at 1 is not going to be a series of bullet points. And if it is, then once you get there, you'll realize that actually there's probably a lot more to go, but also you don't feel complete. And so you need to figure out what are those intangibles at 1 that you're sort of shooting towards. And ideally, you'll be approaching those throughout your entire life. You know, if once you hit $10 million, you can go to 20 million. Once you hit 20 million, you can go so forth. And you can always move the goalpost. And so it's not going to be that list of easily quantifiable metrics that make you happy or successful. Find your internal drive and sprint towards that.
Yeah, finding your why is everything. I totally agree.
Every time you hit a goal, you're like 10 more goals deeper in, and you're like, okay, 10 more.
I guess we can wrap up here. Carter, thank you so much really for your time.